So it's definitely been a slightly turbulent weekend for Bitcoin. Since our last live stream, Bitcoin did end up sliding all the way down to the 112k target that a lot of you guys were expecting. I personally didn't love this target, and I still don't. The issue with this with this support level is that to me it's very light. The only real, and by the way, I mean, just if we kind of scroll back and look at all of Bitcoin's price history, right? The only time Bitcoin ever traded at this 112k range was here, and then a little bit over here on what we've done just now. And I think that's really important because it tells us that there's really not that much kind of price history established over here. And Bitcoin is now in the middle of a correction that to me doesn't look small. We had a pretty kind of bullish pattern over here, which, we had already produced a few of during this uptrend. This one has now failed, and we're potentially coming back up for some back tests, which I know that some aggressive traders are probably going to be looking for shorts somewhere here, and we will get to that as we progress through this video. If you're excited for the, do me a favor and smash up those likes as you are coming in here to this video today. It's okay, right? From that perspective, there's definitely some, reason to believe that we could be kind of rising up to capture a little bit of resistance here. And by the way, Bitcoin dominance has kind of moved in one of the ways that we were expecting, right? I drew this ascending triangle for you guys here on the last video. Bear with, I'm clicking all sorts of random stuff right now. I drew this ascending triangle for you guys here showing how, I was expecting Bitcoin dominance to still get a little bit higher, and that has actually happened here, which is fantastic. But it's still not risen by very much. From its low, it's only managed to gain 2.2 percentage points on this chart here, so not a particularly large increase whatsoever. And I think that obviously all of this is just influenced by the S&P 500, right? I mean, the S&P 500 had a really nice kind of bullish after hours trading session. It opened higher on the Thursday, and then it just shat the bed completely. Thursday was a bad day for the S&P. Friday was a bad day for the S&P. And if this continues, Monday, tomorrow will also be a bad day for the S&P 500. Now, I don't know if that's going to continue or not, but it's not a good setup. And the S&P has clearly entered some sort of a kind of correctional wave right now, right? This is the biggest retracement, bear in mind, that the S&P has had now, about 3.2%. It's the biggest it's had since, here, which was May of 2025. So we're going back about, what is that, like 2-3 months now. Which is, again, like, none of this stuff is terrible. None of this stuff is bad at all. Like, I'm certainly not worried or concerned at all. But I don't think that we're done yet, like, especially given how close we are to the previous all-time high that we set in February of this year. To me, it just makes sense that the S&P, now that it's already started it just comes back down, finishes it, and then continues on that staircase to heaven. And if that is going to happen, then that definitely indicates that Bitcoin is not done dumping as well. So that's something that we're going to have to keep in mind in this market here, because if Bitcoin is not done dumping, obviously it can drop a fair bit lower from here, and it's already used the support zone, bear in mind. Now, it'd be a little bit different if Bitcoin was still up here and we had the support level untested, because we could say that this is in play. But now that we've already bounced off it once, we really need to do something with this bounce. This bounce needs to get somewhere impressive, and it ideally needs to stay up there, because if it doesn't, we're looking at a second retest of this level. And that, ladies and gents, is ultimately the point that I'm making in this video. I don't want to see a second test of this 112k level. I was never super fond of this level. I didn't love it like everybody else loves it. I'm not, I never said that it can't be support. Of course it can be support, and it was, but I'm not expecting it to be a reliable area of support. It just wasn't tested for long. If we look at this in terms of price history, again, just, as far as Bitcoin has ever traded in this range, it was a 50-day range, and it resulted in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rejections, and only 2 of those rejections actually happened at the 112k range. So the bottom line is it could even, sweep this low and just come a little bit lower down to the bottom of this box at about, 110,500, something like that. These kind of price levels make a lot more sense for me, just to see Bitcoin maybe grab a little bit more liquidity down here as well. And especially, like I said, if this is all going to be happening against the backdrop of the S&P 500 dropping down as low as it could for that back test of its previous all-time high. I really think that's a big deal. Now, this is absolutely amazing. This is the best case scenario that I've been outlining for you guys on this YouTube channel for a little bit now, because it's going to give us some really good opportunities, all right? We've conclusively broken above the previous all-time high. We managed to get a pretty decent 12-13% above that all-time high, which is enough to tell us that this is a legitimate break of the all-time high. And so if we're pulling back now, we're not pulling back now with uncertainty of will this trend continue. I mean, obviously some people are going to have that uncertainty, but I don't have that uncertainty. I'm assuming, I don't know, many of you guys probably don't have that uncertainty either. I think many of us at this stage have, accepted that this is indeed, a real breakout, and we're going to keep doing work with this. I think many people don't have that expectation in their head, and actually they think that we're dropping down to 20k or whatever, but these are the same people that have been calling for 20k for a couple of years, since we fell down to 15k. They were calling for 20k back when we were at 70,000. They were calling for 20k back when we were at 30,000. And obviously none of those things ended up happening. So could they be right? Yes, but I'm not really going to pay much mind to that, because I don't think that those ideas have been validated particularly well. I honestly think for the most part, these people saying these things are just burnt. They're upset that they haven't been, as engaged in the market as they would like to be while the market is going up so well. And so naturally, that person is now going to try and say that the market has to drop to make themselves feel okay with missing the train, which is completely normal. We've all done it. I've done it. And that's why I think it's just important to kind of be aware of that. So if this thing does end up kind of dropping down a little bit more, that's where I think we're going to start to see some issues, because these support zones get very mushy here. There's not a whole lot that we're working with. I mean, there's a lot of price action that happened in this range, including back here in, late 24, early 2025. But, it's like I've drawn on the other chart. There's just support levels everywhere. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to pick out which one Bitcoin might use. Obviously, it ended up using this one here, which is, like I said, I mean, it was a level, it's where Bitcoin topped out at. But again, like I said, we need to see something happen with this pump. And I think this is my next point here. Typically when you bounce off a support level, you're going to bounce off that support level with a decent amount of strength. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to be usually a pretty quick and a pretty sharp kind of move upwards when you're, when you truly have bottomed. You typically, you don't hang around for particularly long when you're capturing support and when you're kind of moving up a little bit, which is really, really nice. And I don't know if we've done that here. I think we've started it. Obviously this is a decent bounce so far. It's definitely not a bad bounce. It usually, like, if things are bad, it would look a lot worse than this. So I think we are showing the right early signs here as far as kind of, where this bounce could take us. But let's be clear, it is still only a 2% bounce, and most importantly, we haven't cleared any resistance levels. Okay, I think this is a really, really important note. The next resistance for Bitcoin on this chart is going to be up here where our support was at about 16,900, right? Maybe we can lower that down to about 15.5 or whatever, but these levels are too weak. The only one I'm interested in is 16.9. And we are nowhere near this level yet. I think if it takes time to get up to this level, if we don't have a quick explosion up there, meaning, basically by the end of today's UTC candle or tomorrow, then at that point, I'm going to start saying, actually, this looks like a weak bounce, because we need to do something a little bit better than that. We need to start getting back above our resistance levels. If we're staying below our resistance levels, then guess what happens at resistance? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying it's definitely going to happen, but I am saying that there's a window of opportunity, and we are losing it, ladies and gents. We are losing that window of opportunity. Here we are on the 4-hour Ichimoku cloud, which has been predicting this for some time now. It closed up, started to paint resistance probably back when we were around over here. And now it's painting resistance at the same level that we were finding support. So this is going to be a serious issue that Bitcoin has to deal with as it kind of continues to progress in this market. And I personally believe, and I've said this continuously over this, market cycle so far, that Bitcoin's only going to be able to get above that kind of resistance level if it has the blessing of the S&P 500 also in an uptrend, which again, like I said, we bring this to the S&P 500. And I mean, you tell me, what do you think is going to happen from here? Do you think it's going to be a nice bullish Monday open, something a little bit like this? Or, since we're already nearly there, are we just coming back down to grab that liquidity? And like I said, if we are, that does translate to potentially, we did the calculation on the live stream about $107,000 for BTC as a speculative bottom target for Bitcoin. So that put Bitcoin somewhere around this yellow line right here. This is at 108. Obviously lots of levels around here, 107.5, definitely makes sense where Bitcoin could, slip below this lower a little bit, grab a little bit more liquidity. And what does that mean for the rest of the market? So like I said, Bitcoin dominance is up, and Bitcoin dominance went up in response to the crash. So now Bitcoin's going back up again, only a little bit. It's up by 2%. And no surprise, that's when Bitcoin's dominance is starting to scale back a little bit here. So we're going to have to see how this continues to progress here. But like I said, if Bitcoin keeps dropping, we're probably going to see this dominance creep up a little bit higher. Ethereum lost some of its gains against Bitcoin, but it held the low that I was outlining for you guys. I said that this low is very, very important. As long as Bitcoin doesn't sweep this low, we're good. And that has happened. However, it's right on the edge of that right now. And I think Ethereum is going to be a really, really good barometer for the rest of the market. Because if Bitcoin does dump again, and if Ethereum loses strength against Bitcoin in turn or in line with that, then that's definitely going to indicate that we're going to lose this support level. And, you know, it's potentially free fall if that does happen, right? I mean, this is not a range that we tend to get a lot of kind of price action in for Ethereum against Bitcoin. Usually it's kind of a pretty clean, quick teleportation. And we can even see that, you know, if we zoom out a lot further, right? Like when Ethereum against Bitcoin here, you know, is kind of trading between this yellow box and this yellow line. It's usually pretty quick. You're all the way up, all the way down, all the way up, all the way down, all the way up, all the way down, all the way up. And then we didn't come back down until now, you know, and that continues throughout these, you know, instances back in 2018, 2019, 2017, where just every time we trade between these two small levels here. By the way, this is 0.25 BTC and 0.3 BTC per token. In all of these situations, Ethereum just flies through this range. It doesn't actually do too much. So, you know, it does become a bit of a vacuum that Ethereum can kind of just fall straight through down to its next zone of support. But if this does end up happening, you're getting some of the best buys in this potential market cycle, potentially, at least in my opinion. Obviously, do your own research. Don't be an idiot. You can read that disclaimer on screen right here. But definitely one of my kind of favorite setups in this market that I think could look really, really good. And you know what's absolutely amazing about this is being able to trade all this shit with free money. So check out the links in the description down below if you're interested in trading on some of the best exchanges in the game. Bybit allows you to trade traditional finance, which means Tesla stock and all that kind of stuff, Nvidia, all that stuff. You can trade that on Bybit right now, which is absolutely sick. So check that out if you're interested in that. And 𝗙𝗢𝗟𝗟𝗢𝗪, we're putting out exclusive chart updates from the team on setups that we're kind of watching. So this is super hot, super actionable, interesting stuff here. Check all that out with the link in the description down below. But again, only if you're not from a restricted region. Bringing it back to the video, though, that's going to be something that I'm watching out for on Ethereum to see if that drop does end up happening. And if it doesn't, that means that Ethereum is actually holding this level and consolidating in a very, very bullish way right at resistance, which is going to be an extremely strong indication of a huge move up. So I don't think there's any losing here for altcoin holders right now, or at least for Ethereum holders right now. Altcoins, obviously, a little bit more contentious. You know, it's not looking so good on some altcoins. Here's Solana against Bitcoin, which, you know, it's really not been able to kind of, you know, hold much strength against Bitcoin here. You know, all of its gains against Bitcoin primarily came in 2024, and it's pretty much lost all of them as well, or it's lost most of those gains as well, you know, at this point now. So, you know, it's not sitting in good posture, but this is actually a really good thing for investors, because if you're kind of looking to get in and you think Solana is a good coin, then, you know, you've got a cheap Solana against Bitcoin now, which is obviously really, really nice. Against the dollar, it's sitting at support right now at about 160, which is nice. There's more support a little bit lower, but it's going to have to drop quite a bit. If it does end up dropping, it could capture support in between. You know, Solana has a weird chart sometimes, but that's what I'm seeing there. And then as for XRP is doing pretty decent, ladies and gents. XRP didn't fall into the support range that I was hoping for, which is unfortunate, but that's completely fine. It does now have resistance up ahead. It managed to find a little bit of support here in January of this year and a little bit of support in July of this year. So definitely possible for XRP to capture a little bit of resistance and then drop down again, which also lines up with Bitcoin's, you know, 116.9 resistance. Obviously, if Bitcoin gets up there, XRP could get quite a bit higher than that, but it does still have resistance up ahead, which I think is important to keep in mind, because right now we do look like we're in a bit of a downtrend. And again, like I said, if that's going to continue with the S&P 500, then we're probably seeing these coins reset into some really, really nice levels. Hopefully, we could just maintain this pattern of kind of setting, you know, higher lows and obviously higher highs. That would be very, very nice indeed, because that allows us to know that, yeah, we're still secure. Maybe we bounce off something like this. We're still setting our higher lows and higher highs. So that would be absolutely fantastic to, you know, just kind of further confirm for us that we're still in a nice kind of uptrend right now for XRP. So that's going to be something that I'll kind of keep on looking out for as this market continues to progress. But again, back to Bitcoin here. You know, if Bitcoin can kind of rise up and do something impressive here, it's got to flip a couple of resistance levels now. But if it can do so, then essentially all we've had is a back test where, you know, we've essentially grabbed some liquidity down, you know, as we've kind of made this move down, which is going to be a really good kind of healthy reset for the market. And that's also the same way that I see the S&P 500. I know that it might be slightly annoying that I keep on talking about the S&P 500 on these videos, but I don't think this analysis would be correct without it. I think a lot of people, they don't do it, and I can't really understand why. The only reason I can think of is because they don't know that the S&P 500 is such an important index to look at for crypto at this stage, right? I think a lot of people are still not fully behind that. A lot of people analyze altcoins and Bitcoin as if they have a life of their own. They don't. Let's be very clear. They don't have a life of their own. Otherwise, if they did, Bitcoin wouldn't be dumping right now exactly in line with the S&P 500. You know what I mean? So I think that's going to be something to watch out for. It's nice that we left a gap up here. Obviously the week trading session kind of finished when Bitcoin was still a little bit higher, probably around where it is right now. So that's it's nice that we've got some potential gaps that we might have to fill, come Monday. But again, these are things that I wouldn't necessarily want to be kind of holding my breath for at all in this market there. So there's lots more that we could cover, but I think those are the important things for now. I don't really think it's worth talking about other stuff right now. Let's pull up a couple of indicators though, just kind of to see where we're at. Yeah, so daily 𝐋𝐄𝐕𝐄𝐗 cloud's looking great, coming in kind of mid-August here. For some support for Bitcoins. I think if Bitcoin can hang around here for a little bit, this could end up being useful for Bitcoin. However, with our EMAs, we pretty much, we're just hanging on by a thread right now. This still totally counts. If Bitcoin can make this into a pump, then that definitely indicates that daily momentum has saved Bitcoin here. But, I do think it's a bit of a stretch. It's not something that I'm kind of, super, super bullish on expecting, I think, at this stage in the market. So these are all things I'll continue to watch. I'll let you guys know as things evolve as well. Like I said, check out the links in the description for some of the best exchanges in the game if you're not from a restricted region. But otherwise, make sure you smash up those likes, subscribe, click the bell, do all that good stuff. And we will see you all in the next video. Cheers.